Awesome.
Welcome, everybody. So I met Thaddeus, it was a couple months ago, several months ago, probably 4 or 5 months ago, talking about podcasting. I had a vision for something here in the Focus Suites. He had a vision. That vision didn't really come to fruition, but it did allow Thaddeus to become a Focus Suites member, so I'm very excited that he's here. I enjoy his energy. I enjoy conversations with him. And I also am looking forward to hearing about your past
Sure.
and your entrepreneurial journey. So we'll just open that up. You have some lessons that you'd like to talk to us about, so I'll leave the floor to you.
Well, thank you, and absolutely, it's great to be back. My time here, we had a wonderful time. It was very much like family. We went through a lot of trials and struggles together, and when you do that, you become close. And so it's great to be back. Some of the faces have changed.
Yep.
You're obviously new, but welcome to the family.
Thank you.
I guess.
I'm glad to be here.
As you talked about we both had a different vision. One of the lessons I'm learning right now is maybe it's not about achieving the vision sometimes as it is as much about who you become or where you end up just chasing the vision. So maybe it's more about who we become and our position and where we are in life, and the vision is just the carrot, as it may be, to get us there. I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in the vision and trying to make the vision happen, we miss a lot of the other serendipities along the way.
Right, we get caught up in what we think we need to achieve and then miss those moments along the way. I agree with that. I feel like that happens a lot. Well, I compare that to raising kids. I have kids now that one's in college, which I never thought it's not that I didn't think that I would see my kids in college. I didn't know that I would be that old to have somebody in college, but that's
I know, right? Right. Well, and I think one of the things that I learned, I was a Boy Scout growing up, and one of the things I earned was my sailing merit badge. And what I learned about sailing is you never go, not like driving or walking, you never go directly where you're going. You never go in a straight line. And in fact, if you're sailing, even if the wind's going exactly where you want to go, you can't sail that way. In fact, sailing directly with the wind is one of the most dangerous ways to sail, because a minor shift in the wind can cause your sail to flip back and forth, and there's nothing quite like a boom on a sail swinging around that you're not paying attention to throw you overboard and cause some cranial damage. But the idea, what I learned was that you kept your objective in mind, and you learned to read all the different things that were going on, whether it was the wind or the waves or the currents, other boats or other things that were in the water. You had to be attentive to everything and react to it and learn how to maximize what was going on to propel you eventually towards your goal.
Sure. And how did that translate to your entrepreneurial journey?
A lot of, and I think I learned this as I started to study conflict resolution, a lot of it was you need to keep your objective in mind, but be open to alternate ways to get there. I think we oftentimes get fixated on this is our path, this is the way we need to solve this problem, instead of focusing on let's just get the problem solved.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Great. Well, tell us about, where would you like to start?
Well, I think an easy way to start would be to go back, because I can tell a whole story, start to finish, of the last time I was here as a tenant. My wife at the time we had an experience at a wedding out on the coast with a photo booth.
Okay.
And we had just a great experience, and it was a wonderful time. And so we looked around and thought, there's nobody doing that here.
Sure.
Opportunity, let's do it. And we did what we thought was our market research. We talked to people all over the country that were doing it and supposedly doing it successful. And there were some good things that came out of that. One was the prevailing thought at the time was that a photo booth should be an enclosed space that people would get into and take photos. But we saw an opportunity. A gentleman out of Southern California had created, and I'll use his name, Open Air Photo Booth, because it very much describes what he did, his design, and it was basically, as we described it, a tower that you stood in front of. The advantage to that was you weren't limited to how many people you could squeeze into a little box. So that allowed us to do some different things that other photo booth companies couldn't. One, it immediately allowed us to take bigger pictures, pictures of more people.
Sure.
It also made it more portable. We could be indoors or outdoors. That, of course, had its own challenges. If there's any photographers, lighting can just wreak havoc. And so we had to learn how to manage some of those kinds of things. But one of the things, what I learned is a lot of times, and I'm not accusing anybody, but you find out people lie. Not by intent, but because they just don't know that maybe what they don't know isn't the truth. And so that was a piece where, and I'm going to jump ahead in the story a little bit, we thought the target market was weddings. We thought it was all about weddings because in the industry, that was your most costly event. You could charge them more for that than anything else.
Sure.
Because Bridezilla, right? And so we got into the market, we got going. We looked at, in businesses, there's three key factors: price, quality, and service. And you can always compete on one. You can occasionally compete on two, but you can never compete on all three. And so we decided that we weren't gonna compete on price. We wanted to be high quality and high service. So we were gonna charge. So when we entered the market, one of the things we did is we set our prices kind of compared to what everyone else was doing, as well as we also considered our own costs. And could we be sustainable? One of the things that we looked at is we were gonna set up a real business, so we did it as a business. And we weren't running it out of our garage or the basement. And so we had expenses. We started here. So we had facilities expenses, printing expenses, insurance expenses. As soon as we brought anybody else on, very quickly we found we had to, start interacting with the state and workers' comp and payroll and those types of things, as opposed to just cash here and there. And so that meant that we had far more overhead than other photo booths in the industry, because most of the people were doing it out of their garage.
Okay.
The other thing is we had, I think our photo booth, I want to say it ran at that point in time, and so this is 15 years ago, 10 to 12, 15 years ago, was about $8,000 for a photo booth. Now at the same time, you could get a used laptop, a cheap webcam, and a simple printer, and you could go. And so for under $1,000, you could certainly have it set up and start doing that. But because we wanted quality, we were willing to kind of pay for that. So we came out, and we were the highest priced in the market, but we also had some of the best service and the highest quality. Couple things, and this is a lesson: don't get chintzy. In the photo booth industry, at the time, people were offering you 2 photos. I think because the way the printer comes out, it's actually printing like a 4x6 that the printer cuts into photo strips, 2x6 photo strips. So they were offering 2 photos per picture, and that was it. If you wanted more, you had to pay extra. And that was a way that they were generating revenue, which from the outside, and to some extent, I think they thought it made sense. Sure. And it does make sense from a narrower view, but when we looked at it is, why on earth would I ever take a picture of 8 people and only give them 2 photos? Like, to me, that was ridiculous. That was the opposite of customer service. You get them built up, you have a great time, you take these great, happy, fun photos, but sorry, you don't get a copy.
Unless you want to pay for it.
Right.
Okay.
And so we're like, nope, out of the gate, if you're in the photo, you get a picture, period. Because it was super easy. And I think at the time it cost us 6 to 10 cents to print a pair of photo strips. Like nothing, you know. Why would I ever chintz on that? And so that was part of where we came on, and we're going to give great service, and it's going to be quality products. And so we got going, and we're up and running a couple months. And where our main competition was a bunch of people who, because it was a trend, it was a really hot trend that was starting to spread, and we were dealing with these people who were mom and pop shops out of their basement garage, and they were starting out charging half of what we were. And for a bride, you know, who's got a budget, that's a big deal. Well, then this company out of Chicago that nobody saw coming came in and swept the nation, and they were called Groupon. And their business model early on was, we're going to take your price, charge half of what you're normally charging, and then we're going to give you half of that. So if we were charging $400 an hour, these mom and pops were charging $2, but they were out in Groupon. Groupon was selling it for $100 an hour, and they were only getting $50. I can't compete with that.
Right.
No way. So we were up and running, we were doing some events, and then all of a sudden, nothing. We couldn't book anything because Groupon had now set the market price that was so low that there was no way, I couldn't leave the office for $50 an hour. And so we sat for a little while doing very, very little. Not even really enough to cover the bills. But I knew that mom and pops couldn't afford $50 an hour either. And so it was a couple months in, we started getting calls to do weddings because that had already been booked by other companies, but they'd called back, they'd paid deposits, and now these other companies weren't returning their phone calls. We had a couple people say, hey, we paid them, you know, $200 to do a 4-hour wedding. Could you come do it for us? And do it for free because we already paid them.
That was an actual question.
And I didn't get it just once. It was multiple times. Like, no.
Because you all work together and you share all your revenues.
Yeah, something like that. And we were like, no. Here's our price. We did stick to our price. I think we ran a couple specials. Everybody said, go to the wedding show, do the wedding show, and give away a prize. And so we did. We gave away a wedding as a drawing. And we didn't get a single booking except the one we gave away. And we spent a whole lot of money and marketing, and those were some of those things where others in the industry said, this is what you do, this is how you do it. And so kind of my lesson out of that is expect the unexpected. There's no way we could have known Groupon was happening.
It's out of your control.
Absolutely. But it was a force that drove almost everybody else out of the business. And one of the other lessons is that I learned a long time ago, and I heard this originally from Napoleon Hill, there's a seed of opportunity in every adversity. And we just had to stay in business long enough to outlive the competition, to get to the point to reset the market value. And we eventually did. We did some other things, and we came out of it very strong. But as an entrepreneur, you know, we set up our, 1, 2, 3, 5-year business plan. Well, because of Groupon, we were about 2 years behind schedule, which when you're thinking year 3, we should be moving out of the focus suites, we were still very much in startup, still trying to generate some of our initial business. Year 4 was actually year 2. Year 5 was year 3, and that was when we actually, through some innovation, pivots, we actually were in the process of really starting to explode the business. I think the last 6 months we were in business, we tripled our size. So I think that was a couple of it. The other thing was learn to innovate and be willing to pivot. That idea of recognizing that's where we want to go. And everybody said weddings is where we were. Well, there was some some weird connections. I didn't invent anything new, but we started to innovate. I had, prior to the Photobrations photo booths, I had done some website building and had learned HTML and learned how in web pages they were starting to run layers. Similar to what you do in Photoshop and those types of things. Well, in the industry, everybody was using a flat picture, and they were a frame, image if anything, and then they were using the photo, the JPEG that came out, and trying to position it within this box on their photo strip. Well, I started realizing that the software that was printing the photos, taking it from the camera to the computer and then to the printer, was actually using HTML. They weren't using regular printer language. And so I started toying around with it with a little bit of graphic. I'm not a graphic designer, but I pretend to be one in my dreams. So I started playing around with it and then talking to graphic designers I knew. We eventually, and this is kind of, find the right people and put them in the right position. We got an excellent graphic designer who she did amazing work. And I started to talk to her about, hey, can we do some layering, and can you give this to me in a layer? And I remember we did one birthday party for some friends, and I knew there was something special about spiders. She, one, was deathly afraid of spiders, hated them, like this birthday person, freaked out about spiders. But she also had a strong belief that spiders were good luck. And so kind of as a special thing, we did an overlay of a spider hanging down on a web that would show up on the photos. And so you're taking the picture, you don't see the spider. Right. You see a preview on the screen, but it wasn't until we handed her the photos and then she saw the spider on the picture, she started flipping out. That was our test that we could start to lay stuff over the photos, which meant we started to do some different things. The other thing is listen to your clients. They will tell you what they want. Always focus on what your client needs, not on what you think they need. And so had done a wedding. We were in business about 3 months. We'd done a wedding out in Grand Island. And there was this guy, probably mid to late 70s, old farmer, and he came up with what I call as the old guy wallet. You know, it's the wallet that's this big, and it's a trifold, so it's this big C. And he pulls his wallet out, and at this point in time, I've worked every event. So I've seen everybody that comes through. I have a good memory for faces. I didn't recognize his face. But he came up and said, hey, we were in your photo booth a couple months back and just had a blast. And I'm like, I was skeptic. I didn't remember. And he pulls this photo strip out of his wallet, and it now is in the shape of a C, so he's got to hold it open. And he's passionately talking about and pointing to this photo about this great time he had, and we had a wonderful time, and I show this to everybody, and I believe it because he's showing it to me again. And the whole time he's doing it, I'm looking right at my photo, or our logo at the bottom. And I thought to myself, this is word of mouth advertising. I'd heard about it and studied it and tried to find it ever since I was 14, and I've not found it since. But this was somebody who absolutely was going crazy about our company, telling everybody about it, pointing to our logo, our web address, and I'm like, this is gold. And so that was one of those things where we started to pivot. The weddings weren't going well. I realized we could do some different things graphically, and I realized that the property of space on the photo strip was really what we were selling. And so I called up, I had worked for a local bank here in Lincoln. Their color is blue. They're very well known. And I was lucky enough to work underneath the marketing director. And so I called up the vice president of marketing and said, hey, can we do this? Can we do an event for you for customer appreciation? And I really sold putting their logo on this photo strip and sending it home with their clients and all this. What I love about him is he was a yes guy. He just loved to try new things and to encourage people. And so he said yes, hired us. It was our first corporate event. And even though we charged them less, gave them a good discount, far less than we were doing for weddings, went off pretty quick. We worked with their graphic designer to make some really neat logos. And really what ended up happening is, and this is my lesson, is identify your KPIs, your key performance indicators. And well, first of all, you have to do enough business to really know what they are. And so as got to the point where we'd started doing enough business, we were charging 25 to 50% more for weddings than we were for corporate events. But what I found was I was spending far more time email communication with our graphic designer, who at this point had moved to Iowa, so everything was email, phone communication with brides. But with the corporate gig, I think I counted it averaged about 5 communications from we're interested in doing it to day of event collecting a check. One of the things we always did is we always collected full payment up front before we left for an event, which put us in a good cash position. We were never hurt for cash. It was never, we had to buy materials before we could go to the event. You know, that was a key. It wasn't, spending thousands of dollars on materials, putting the product together and then selling it. We didn't have that nice delay. That was a side piece.
And that was probably standard for your corporate clients, I would guess. Mm-hmm. That maybe was a change for your brides.
Sometimes.
For your weddings.
Yeah.
And maybe they weren't used to paying everything up front.
Sure.
Correct.
Sure. And so that put us in a good position as well for moving all this. But so as we started to look at our KPIs and like what is our performance indicator, one of the things I realized was we were starting to rebook corporate gigs. They would book us for more than one event at a time. And I can say to this day, I never walked out of a wedding and thanked a bride or a groom and said, hey, thanks for having us at your wedding. We'll see you at your next wedding next year.
Not very many repeat customers.
Right. Now, we did typically book, because we did a great job, we would typically book like one wedding out of a wedding.
Sure.
But it was a one and a one and a one, and it was a very slow process. So as we started to look at this, and again, doing enough business where we started to, I could look at what was happening and say, one, there's a lot of work going in here. Yes, we're charging more, but I'm also sending an extra employee because we were making photo albums right there on the spot. And it was part of the wow factor. I guess we wanted to wow our clients. That's always how I want to do. I want to wow. And so I would bring together someone who was very creative and quick. And as the photo strips are coming out, they would create books, these wedding albums. And we'd have guests sign. I think we had one really creative, the bride and groom provided recipe cards and had asked guests to bring their favorite recipe to share. And so we would put those recipe cards next to their photo in the photo album. And one of my favorite things, let your employees share the joy is another piece. Let your staff enjoy that. And so we would take, at the end of the wedding, the dance and all that, we'd pack up and we would deliver the photo album right on the spot. And I think the majority of the time, when we would take the wedding album, what I told my staff to do is turn the wedding album around so they can see it and start to flip through it and let them say, here's what we're providing you. Almost every single time, the bride would break down in tears. Now I recognize it's been a long day, hugely emotional, like anything, they're gonna break down in tears. But we provided them. They saw again and again how amazing this was for brides who, the day's a whirlwind. Again and again, they would see pictures of people going, oh my gosh, I didn't even know they were here. And so we captured that for them. It was something special. And for our staff, who were working frantic and working hard and late hours, we'd often get back here 2, 3 in the morning.
And Piyush would be here.
Yeah, Piyush would, absolutely. And that helped them realize that what they were doing was meaningful. And so they were willing to do that. Another thing we did, so in 2011 when we started, we said that we were going to pay all our staff $20 an hour, which now it's a little more standard. But part of that was we looked around and the other people in that event space were paying their staff $10, $11, $12 an hour. I recognized I wanted exceptional staff, and I was only paying them for a 3-hour event. I was paying for 5 hours typically, and that might be once a week. That's not a lot, and so we realized that I wasn't just paying them for that work, but I was paying them to be available. And these were talented people that could go elsewhere and get paid well. And so I needed to pay them enough that they were willing to put off everything else and want to come work for us. And so that's what we did. So I struggle a little bit with the whole minimum wage thing, not to wax political. I don't think it needs to be a government thing. I think it needs to be something that we as entrepreneurs can drive, and if we provide a good product, if we do that well, we can pay our employees well.
Absolutely. So you talked a little bit about what initially you thought your target market was, and that really transitioned, right?
Yeah.
So I had talked to Thaddeus earlier today, and in my class we talk about our target market, and our students evaluate that, and it's really about being an entrepreneur and being open to what you initially thought was your product or was your target market, and being open to making that change given what your customers say, given what you're seeing in the industry. So you were open to that, making that change. Well,
and I want to lay a foundation for that. Part of it is when you're looking at a business or an opportunity, and I don't know if you teach Porter's 5 forces. And studying, what is the supplier power? What is the buyer? What is, threats of substitution? What could they get? Would they just do a DJ instead of a photo booth? Or what are, threat of new entry or competition in there? Well, Porter's 5 forces is great, and I reference it all the time. But in the wedding, what we didn't realize was where we were, and this is part of know your client, know your customer, is. It wasn't until a while in that I realized brides were given these wedding planning packages. And one of it was they're putting together their budget. And the entertainment at the reception was at the very bottom. That's where we fit in what they were seeing. So as brides were thinking about putting together their day, the very last thing they thought about, if they still had money, was us. And that's a very tough place to be, so you're the cherry on top. Well, if there's not much of a sundae, there's not a cherry. And so we found ourselves chasing after trying to get business from a very disadvantaged place.
Because you're competing with flowers and dresses and food.
And groom gifts and everything else. And if they have to make a choice, we're the thing that goes. Because they didn't see the value in it. Now again, that was where we would oftentimes book a wedding out of a wedding because they saw the value. Show people the value and then they'll buy is another lesson. I need to go back and outline this whole speech. I'm coming up with stuff that isn't in my notes. But part of that market was recognizing that weddings were not where we were best suited. It wasn't profitable. The rest of the industry swore up and down that's what it was. And that was in our market research. We did the research, but what we found was it was faulty. And it wasn't that they lied to us, they just didn't know any better. And that was what they were struggling in. Our ability to start to see some different things and do some changes, it created opportunities for us. It created opportunities for us to start to be a service provider for other photo booth companies around the country, and even around the globe at this point. We were starting to be global because of Facebook and some other things, where we could create their graphic overlays for them and charge them a good price for it, and a totally side product that had nothing that we never would have expected. We didn't pursue that very far, one, because we just didn't have the staff to do it. And my partner at the time didn't necessarily have the vision, was very safety, security was high on the priority, and so wasn't willing to sometimes get involved in risks. Didn't understand, was more risk adverse, avoid the risk, as opposed to mitigate the risk. manage the risk. Yes, that's a risk. What can we put in place, to make it not so risky?
Integrator?
Maybe. I'd like to go back and have her take that, but I think that ship's sailed,
Okay.
so to speak. But it was really starting to know who our market was, and the KPI started doing that, being willing to pivot, and then that part, focus on what was profitable. Marketing was a huge expense. That once we started to figure it out, the traditional, we tried print, we tried radio, we tried all that kind of stuff, and none of it returned. What I learned again from the vice president at this blue bank is that a lot of those things are for name recognition, for top of mind. But at a point in time when we were talking on the internet, everybody wanted a click-through rate. They wanted how many sales per clicks can I get? And so there wasn't that 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio on any of that. So we needed to, as a small business, focus on what would work. And that was where, in that, identifying that corporations and organizations was really where we were most profitable. And there was repeat business. Well, how do you target them? Who's the decision maker? And I'm a little piratey in that I like to pull levers that I know what I'm going to get. And so what I started to look at as we were starting to pursue and trying to call and market to organizations, I found these were the decision makers. But they were oftentimes hard to get to, in this level. And hard to, even if I could get to them, how could I get them to truly understand what we wanted? So what I eventually discovered is, in organizations, there's usually somebody who tells that decision maker what decision they're going to make. I love that part. So I went a step above and said, where are these people? In Lincoln, what we found is those people are the ones who spend a lot of their time giving to charities and in those organizations. So we started basically, what are some of the bigger charitable organizations in Lincoln, and how can we get in there and get our photo booth so that people can see it? Our marketing strategy at the end was basically, if there was a not-for-profit charitable organization that was doing a silent auction with a dinner of something, we would give away a free package to be auctioned off, but only under the condition that we were able to bring a photo booth and provide it and run it during the event so that they could see what we were doing. And typically that put us in the range where we became one of their premier auction items. And so
it got you in front of the decision makers.
It got us in front of the president or the upper C-suite, who then saw, this is great, we need to have this at our event. They would sometimes buy it right there on the spot, create a great influx of cash for the organization. But then those that didn't win would go back and say, here's my photo strip. We had a great time. Call these people and book them for our next event. And so it became a great way, one, to give back to our community, but two, to really secure the sale before we ever went after it.
And that was definitely not in your original business plan.
Absolutely not.
Even close.
No, and not in any other photo booth. Nobody else was doing that. That was the point where, when my partner and I separated, we looked at selling the business, and we talked to a business broker, laid everything out, and he looks at us and says, I can sell your business, and I can get you a good price for it, I can be successful. But he had created several franchises, and he says, what you have here is, you really need to franchise this. You're missing just a couple manuals, and that was our plan before we decided we were going different directions. He said, you really need to finish your manuals and let me help you franchise this. Because we had solved some problems, were profitable in ways that nobody else in the industry was doing. And so we're really kind of at that point. Because we'd been willing to pivot, because we took a hard look at our KPIs, and we'd set some high standards and solved problems and survived through times when others couldn't. Does that answer some questions?
It does. It does. Are you open for some questions from the audience, or did you have any final words?
You know, the final word I would say is you got to take care of yourself. At this point in time, I have been running at that startup, you know, the one point in time in an airplane when you've got the throttles all the way forward, you know, to the firewall is when you're trying to get off the ground. Once you get some air under your wings and you get some elevation, you throttle back. I ran for about a decade at that, and it took a physical toll, took a mental toll, an emotional toll. And so the key is you got to take care of yourself. It's where I also come back to it's not necessarily about the vision, but about who you become, the people around you. For me, my faith is very important to me. Serving my Creator is the preeminent importance. And I've learned that has to happen before everything else I do. And everything else I do for that purpose. And that allows me to, at times, isolate and take rest. I need to, even though there are tasks that I absolutely could do. A lot of us think, well, you have to get those things done. No, you don't. We put those limitations on ourselves, and we don't. And so, take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. You know, if you get your vertical alignment right, it's a whole lot easier to get your horizontal alignment right. So, that's what I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love questions.
All right. Does anybody have any questions?
I know you're a Focus Suite member again, and you have a new venture. Would you like to expound on your new adventure?
Sure. So Jody's asking about the new venture. Thank you. Life is always an adventure. If it's not, you're doing it wrong. And I think if you don't enjoy what you're doing, if you don't enjoy your job, your career, you're doing it wrong. It's about you and how you're approaching it. It's not about your position. So I would say about 5 years ago, I started a journey. And a journey of trying and figure out who is God. You know, in our world, we have all kinds of ideas and all kinds of experiences. And I looked, for me, I think the preeminent history of God starts in what the Israelites, the Jews, started with, and I think through Jesus and from his life forward. And so what we look at a lot of is the compilation of books we call the Bible. And so I went back and I started reading through it, and I know people study these books for all kinds of things, for history or for theology. I just wanted to know who is God. And what I found as I read it over the course of about 3 years, I tried one of those read the Bible in a year program. If there's anything, I'm not consistent. My name is Thaddeus, and without ADD, I'd just be Theus. It took me about 3 years, but what I found was the God that I saw in there was very different than the God that anybody else had told me. I never saw an angry God. I never saw a God who was vengeful. What I saw was a God who was compassionate about people. He loved people, and he wanted them to live and have good lives. But I saw over and over again, we tend to mess things up. And we tend to try and do things that we weren't designed to do. You know, I can try and, I've learned to plumb. I can fix a leaky sink. I don't ever take a hammer to the sink. I might take a big wrench. I might even take, a cheater, an extended bar to get more leverage, but a hammer doesn't work. And so there are things that we're hammers that we're trying to fix pipes. And what I saw was this God who said, stop doing it that way. Do it this way. It's better this way. And as I started to understand that, I got all the way through all these stories, and I realized all these stories are at least 2,000 years old. Is this God that I read about dead and gone, or is he still alive? Is he still active today? And that's a rhetorical question. So I started a podcast of, just wanting to interview people and hear how they've experienced God. And it's been amazing. Some of the stories, as people have shared with me, one, I just started asking people because I'm curious. And I saw the impact of hearing someone else talk about their experience and them encountering God changed and encouraged so many other people. And I was like, this needs to happen. I grew up, I had terrible allergies as a kid. My mom connected up with Amway Corporation and through their business, because they had products I could use as a kid that I didn't break out in hives when she washed my clothes.
Right.
And in that business, they would send out these tape of the week things. And every week, if you're working that business, you'd get a tape, and it was sometimes about product knowledge and sometimes about running your business. But about once a month, there was somebody's story tape about their success story of where they were when they started the business and how terrible, life was a wreck. They were, robbing Peter to pay Paul. At one point in time, I learned that when a bill collector's calling and you can't get him off the phone, go to the kitchen, drop a pan on the floor, and go, "Oh my God, I gotta go." And they're like, "Oh, sorry," and then you can hang up. I learned that from a story tape one time. But what I found was these were stories of the challenges they went through, and how they had to grow to overcome the challenges, and who they were afterwards, and the life they lived, and the lifestyle they'd created for themselves and their families. And I realized the power of someone else's story. And so I have these two things merging, and I'm like, how do we get these stories into somebody's ear? Can we do it once a week? And that's a huge feat, but we've set that as a goal. And now we're actually recording stories. They're moving. And we've just at the point now where I've got a critique group that we're sending the stories out to, kind of the feedback. I'm learning how to be a better interviewer. And how do I help someone who isn't a storyteller tell their story? How do I find meaning in it? And it allows me then to pursue this journey of really continuing to discover, who is this God that we talk about? And is he really who we think he is? And as we're starting to do this, just starting to share these stories, we're just at the part now where I'm starting to get some feedback on how well they connect. And again, this goes back to know your clients, know your audience.
Because what you may think may not be what your customers are looking for.
Well, absolutely. And as I go back and re-listen to the interview, there are times I'm like, oh man, I should have totally asked this. Why did I ask that? And so it's learning to be present. The growth that I'm going through and who I'm becoming in this process, I like myself more and more every day. And the people around me like me more and more too. So again, reaffirming that it's the journey and who we become in the journey. So I hope that answers your question a little bit about what we're doing. Yes?
Do you see yourself more as a visionary or an integrator? Do that duality? Is there any kind of battle in you with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that we took the quiz here a while back. Very much visionary. I struggle immensely at integrator. Again, ADD. It's this was one of the lessons I learned watching business. I've been studying businesses since my first business I started when I was 10. Great story, you could have me back. But what I learned is the visionaries, it's usually best if they cast the vision and then leave. As a kid growing up, I saw the most successful businessmen were, and I grew up in South Dakota, and they were in Alaska hunting or Canada fishing or Texas hunting or, deep sea fishing. They were always gone on vacation. I thought that was a serendipity of success. I've now learned that's a requirement for success. You have to, the visionary has to find an integrator. They need to find a business manager. They need to find a technician to do the things. They need to give them the tasks, and then they need to get out of the way. Too many visionaries stick their fingers in the works. They try to innovate and change too quickly. And the best thing they can do is get out of town. Turn their phone off so they can't answer the phones, and let those people who are better gifted at doing those parts of the job, the parts of the business, let them do it. And so I think in hindsight, looking back, that's why they were successful, is because they left. And they'd come back, recast the vision a little bit, give a few ideas, and then leave.
And also taking care of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
John, did you have a question? You didn't? I thought for sure you had your hand up.
No, I was pointing to him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, other questions?
Well,
Yeah.
See? I question.
we talked before, a month ago or so, but how do you see yourself, how do you see God, I'll just say it straight out, how do you see God leading you to integrate this career with your other career? What might be some of those launch points?
One of the things I'm learning is I see the world differently. And so the question is, how do I see the two connecting? And I don't know that I have that same paradigm. I think my paradigm is, I've asked that question and I've not got an answer. I think there's an example, one of the guys in the New Testament, Paul, called himself a tent maker. He was probably as near as I can tell, he was responsible more for launching and founding Christianity than anyone else. And he didn't, in our missionary type world, we oftentimes, missionaries get support from others in order to fund their activities. This guy, Paul, didn't. He went and did his job as a tent maker, and that was how he funded all of his expanding. And there's a lot of stuff behind that. You can learn a lot about Paul. He's an amazing, interesting guy. But I also know that as visionaries, oftentimes as we try and we want to pursue 5 different visions, and a new vision every day. My ex-partner used to call me a serial entrepreneur, and it is a curse. Everywhere I see opportunity. And learning to focus on 1 or 2 at a time is really difficult for me. And so I need integrators. I need about 6. And I'll put them in about 3 different ventures each. And I know that there's a lot of things going on in my life, and trying to understand that, I know that I can't serve 2 visions at once. And so I've struggled with that exact question. Do I continue to do what I do because I work as a financial planner? That's how I pay my bills. That's my tent making, as Paul would say. But then I'm passionate about doing this. And I look at, a lot of people will ask, open doors, closed doors. And I've struggled with this because I in my heart, I believe it's one or the other. I don't know which one it is. And doors keep opening, things keep happening in both places. And so it's one of those things. I think maybe I'm having success in both places because I'm needing to learn to not be dependent on myself, to trust, and to say enough's enough at the end of the day. I'm a maximizer. And so I will work on the most effective part of my business until 5 o'clock, and then get up and go, and I miss the other parts of the integrator business that need done for me to be successful. I'm a failure in that piece. But so what I'm having to learn is to not pursue either vision to the point that my own detriment, and take time for myself, be quiet, eat healthy, exercise, get rest. I think it's really curious, as I studied the Jews, their day starts at sundown. So if you think about that, the first thing they do is eat with their family. The next thing they do is sleep. Think about if the first two things we do is nourish our body and get the rest we need. I've got this great big huge task of things to do. What am I going to do? I'm going to eat, and then I'm going to go rest. Totally counterintuitive. And yet, I think that's something I'm working on. I don't know if that answers your question a little bit.
I have a couple other things we'll talk.
Okay. Yes.
So, in your looking towards the future, are you seeing yourself that if this new venture produces what you're praying it does, are you going to be phasing out the other portion for the tent making tool?
I have no idea. One of the things we do, so I had this idea for a podcast, and as I started casting that vision, I found that there was room for a lot of other people. Other people wanted to come on board and wanted to be a part of it, and as they did that, it sounds like potentially down the road, I don't know, 6 months, a year, maybe more, I don't know, but it sounds like there may be multiple people doing podcasts all under the same umbrella. And so, when we first came in, we were the Who is God podcast. And now we've kind of changed it to Tacklebox Studios, as we've kind of broadened that vision a little bit to open up for some of the other people to come in. Like one of the guys that's my recording engineer, here's a lesson. I did a decade in radio. and I'd done theater and recording, and I love doing that stuff. In this venture, that's not my job. In fact, the most comfortable chair in our studio is the engineer's chair, the recording engineer's chair. I have yet to sit in that chair. Every time I go over there, it'd be a great desk to work at. I can't bring myself to sit in that chair because that's not my position. That chair represents that role, and I truly feel if I stepped into that role, I'd be violating my purpose. And so one of our engineers that stepped up is doing the role of engineer because he wants to learn the process. I love the idea of working to learn. But he has expectations that as he's pursuing something in 3 to 5 years, he will start a podcast of some sort. And so again, that creates this umbrella, and we're in the process of setting up a board for that organization that actually puts me in my podcast under their authority, where they could actually say, we're next in the podcast. That's very hard for a visionary to do, but I think in this point it's appropriate, because the vision is more than me.
Any other questions for Thaddeus? We are coming up on the end of our time. If someone has one more question.
How's the market research for what you're trying to do? What's that involve?
Great question. There's qualitative and quantitative. And I think any researcher will tell you the best research is qualitative. But in order to make it meaningful, you have to quantitate it. And that's incredibly, incredibly hard. It's a lot of it was one-to-one. And it's really easy to take one person's specific feedback and explode it into the big deal. And so I think you need to take back and say, this person's feedback is one piece of the puzzle, and look at the whole picture, and you can start to do that. Learning qualitative and how to make it quantitative is learning to ask good questions. The best questions are open-ended questions. It's hard to quantitate open-ended questions.
When you solve that little mystery, let me know. 'Cause
Okay.
I've got that
When-
going on.
When I solve,
For the entrepreneurship
right.
centers.
When I solve that, I'll write the book, and I won't be here anymore. You'll find me on an island.
Okay. I'll come and visit, and then we can talk about it.
Yep.
That was a great question, Luke. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Thaddeus, for your time today. And
Absolutely.
for your insight and for your lessons. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for coming out in the Drury Day today, and we will plan on seeing everybody next week. So
All right.
take care.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thank you. That
Yeah,
was good.
good. I'm glad you thought so.